When a group of bullies targets what they think is an easy victim on a crowded subway platform, they have no idea they're about to face a former Special Forces operative who spent years learning that true strength comes from protecting others. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity. Subscribe now for more stories that prove heroes walk among us every day. The underground veins of Chicago's Red Line pulsed with the familiar chaos of evening rush hour. Commuters pressed together like sardines, their faces illuminated by smartphone screens as they counted down the minutes until escape from another grinding workday. The platform reeked of stale coffee, urban decay, and the collective exhaustion of a city that never truly rested. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood near the platform's edge, her small frame almost swallowed by the surging crowd. At barely 5'3" and wearing wire-rimmed glasses that seemed too large for her delicate features, she looked like exactly what she was, a university professor who spent more time with ancient texts than modern troubles. Her canvas messenger bag bulged with student papers, and her cardigan hung loose over narrow shoulders that had never known physical confrontation. What the crowd couldn't see beneath her unassuming exterior were the scars. Not the visible kind, but the ones carved deep by 12 years in Army Special Operations. The quiet woman grading papers on medieval literature had once moved through hostile territory with the precision of a shadow, had made split-second decisions that saved lives, had carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. But that was another lifetime. These days, Elena's battles were fought with red ink and tenure committees. The approaching train's headlight pierced the tunnel's darkness, and the crowd pressed forward with renewed urgency. Elena adjusted her glasses and gripped her bag tighter, preparing for the familiar dance of boarding during peak hours. Around her, conversations blended into white noise, complaints about work, weekend plans, the eternal grievances of city living. She noticed them before they noticed her. 4 men in their 20s, loud and aggressive, cutting through the crowd with the entitled swagger of those who had never learned to respect boundaries. Their voices carried over the platform's din, crude jokes and casual threats that made nearby commuters unconsciously step away. They wore their hostility like armor, feeding off the discomfort they created in others. Elena had seen their type before, in different uniforms and different countries. Predators who measured their worth by the fear they could inspire in those weaker than themselves. The train screeched to a halt, its doors sliding open with mechanical precision. The crowd surged forward, and Elena found herself swept along in the human tide, her attention momentarily diverted by the logistics of simply surviving rush hour. She didn't see the collision coming. "Watch where you're going." The voice exploded with manufactured outrage as Elena's shoulder brushed against one of the aggressive men while boarding. She had barely made contact, just the inevitable bump of overcrowded public transportation, but he reacted as if she had personally insulted his entire family. Elena turned, her expression immediately apologetic. "I'm sorry, I didn't." "Sorry doesn't cut it, lady." The man who spoke was built like a linebacker gone to seed, his neck thick with muscle and attitude. His 3 companions flanked him, their body language shifting from casual aggression to focused menace. "You got eyes? Or are those glasses just for show?" The train car had fallen uncomfortably quiet. Dozens of passengers suddenly found their phones fascinating, their newspapers urgent, anything to avoid becoming involved in what was clearly escalating beyond a simple accident. This was the unspoken rule of urban survival. See nothing, hear nothing, get home safely. Elena's military training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, identify exits, protect civilians. But her conscious mind tried to de-escalate, falling back on the mild-mannered professor persona that had served her well in academic settings. "It was completely accidental," she said softly, her voice carrying the measured tone she used with difficult students. "The train was crowded, and I certainly didn't mean any disrespect." The leader, because there was always a leader in groups like this, stepped closer. His breath smelled of cheap beer and cheaper cologne, and his eyes held the flat, empty look of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "Disrespect," he repeated, savoring the word. "Yeah, that's exactly what this is. You intellectuals think you're better than working people like us, don't you?" Elena's heart rate remained steady, but her mind was already calculating angles, distances, the positioning of innocent bystanders. The train car offered limited maneuvering room, but she had worked in tighter spaces before. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," she said, and meant it. "I'm just trying to get home from work, same as everyone else." "Same as everyone else," one of his friends mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "Listen to how she talks, like she's giving a lecture or something." The leader's smile was cold and predatory. "Maybe she needs to learn some manners. What do you think, boys? Should we teach the professor a lesson about respect?" The question hung in the air like a physical threat. Elena felt the familiar calm descending over her, the same state of hyper-aware readiness that had kept her alive in places where hesitation meant death. Her breathing deepened almost imperceptibly, her muscles preparing for action while her mind ran through tactical options. She noticed the elderly man sitting 3 seats away, his hands shaking as he gripped his cane. The teenage girl by the window, her eyes wide with fear. The mother holding her young son, both of them pressed against the far end of the car. All potential casualties if this went wrong. "There's really no need for this to continue," Elena said, her voice taking on a different quality. Still quiet, but with an undertone of steel that made the leader pause mid-swagger. "Why don't we just call it an accident and move on?" But de-escalation required 2 willing parties, and these men had tasted blood in the water. They had an audience now, a car full of frightened commuters who would serve as witnesses to their dominance. Backing down wasn't an option, not when their reputations were on the line. "Move on." The leader laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, you bumped into me, disrespected me in front of all these people, and now you want to just move on? That's not how the world works." His friends spread out slightly, creating a loose semicircle around Elena. The movement was instinctive, predatory, wolves isolating their prey. Other passengers pressed themselves further away, some moving to different sections of the car entirely. Elena's peripheral vision catalogued every detail: the emergency brake 20 feet to her left, the car's exits blocked by the positioning of the group, the metal handrails that could serve as weapons if necessary. Her military mind was fully engaged now, running threat assessments with the cold precision of a computer. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said, her tone still reasonable but carrying a warning that only someone with her background would recognize. "People are trying to get home to their families. Their children. Let's not ruin their evening over an accident." The second man, lanky with nervous energy, stepped closer. "Maybe if you got on your knees and apologized properly, we might consider letting it slide." His suggestion sent a ripple of disgust through the car. A businessman muttered something under his breath and pulled out his phone, but whether to call for help or record the incident wasn't clear. Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a hardness that spoke of battlefields and life-or-death decisions. "That's not going to happen." "Oh, it's not." The leader's voice rose, feeding off the attention. "You think you got a choice here, Professor?" "Everyone has choices," Elena replied quietly. "You can choose to walk away right now. You can choose to let this go. Or you can choose to find out what happens when you threaten someone who's had enough." The car fell completely silent except for the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks. Even the leader seemed momentarily unsettled by the calm certainty in her voice. But pride and peer pressure are powerful forces, and he had gone too far to retreat now. "Big words from a little lady," he sneered, reaching out to grab her arm. "Let's see if you can back them up." It was the last mistake he would make that day. Elena's response was so swift and precise that half the car missed it entirely. One moment the leader was reaching for her arm with confident aggression. The next, he was doubled over in agony, his wrist trapped in what appeared to be a simple grip but felt like his bones were being systematically compressed. "I asked you nicely," Elena said, her voice still conversational despite the fact she had just rendered a man twice her size completely helpless. "Multiple times." The lanky friend lunged forward, either to help his leader or to assert his own dominance. Elena shifted her weight, redirected his momentum with a textbook hip throw, and sent him crashing into an empty seat with enough force to rattle the windows. The remaining 2 attackers hesitated, suddenly realizing they had made a fundamental miscalculation about their target. The quiet professor with the wire-rimmed glasses had just neutralized two grown men without breaking a sweat or changing her expression. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the back of the car. "Who is she?" Elena released the leader's wrist, and he stumbled backward, cradling his injured hand against his chest. His face had gone pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "You broke my wrist," he accused, though he was clearly afraid to test whether it was actually broken or just experiencing the lingering effects of expertly applied pressure. "No," Elena corrected matter-of-factly. "I applied a basic joint lock that temporarily restricts blood flow and creates significant discomfort. If I had wanted to break your wrist, you would know the difference." Her clinical explanation was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. It spoke of knowledge gained through experience, of someone who understood exactly how much damage the human body could sustain. The third attacker, the smartest of the group, was already backing away. "This is crazy, man. Let's just get out of here." But the leader's pride had been shattered along with his confidence, and wounded pride often drove men to desperate acts. "You think you're some kind of tough guy? We'll see about that." He pulled out his phone, not to call for help but to record. "When we're done with you, this is going on every social media platform. Everyone's going to see what happens to stuck-up intellectuals who think they can mess with real men." Elena sighed softly, the sound carrying a weight of disappointment and resigned acceptance. "You were given every opportunity to walk away. Every single one." The fourth man, emboldened by his leader's renewed aggression and the promise of viral fame, decided to rush Elena from her blind spot. It was a tactical error that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of who they were dealing with. Elena spun to face him, her movement fluid and economical. She caught his incoming punch with one hand, used his own momentum to pull him off balance, and delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus that dropped him gasping to the floor. "Stay down," she advised quietly, then turned her attention back to the leader, who was still filming with shaking hands. The lanky friend had managed to pull himself out of the seat, nursing what was likely a bruised shoulder and a severely damaged ego. He looked between his fallen companion and Elena, clearly trying to decide whether loyalty or self-preservation was the better choice. "You can't just assault people," the leader shouted, though his voice cracked slightly. "This is battery. I've got it all on video." Elena took a step toward him, and he immediately backed up until he hit the train car's wall. "You approached me," she said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow student. "You threatened me. You made physical contact first. And you did it all in front of dozens of witnesses." She gestured to the car full of commuters, many of whom were now openly staring in amazement. Several had their own phones out, recording everything from multiple angles. "Self-defense is not assault," Elena continued in her professorial tone. "But what you did, targeting someone you perceived as vulnerable, attempting to intimidate and humiliate them in public, that has a name too." The businessman who had been muttering earlier spoke up suddenly. "I recorded the whole thing. Started when they cornered her. Ladies telling the truth. They started it." A chorus of agreement rose from other passengers. The mother with the young child nodded vigorously. "They were horrible to her. She tried to apologize and de-escalate multiple times." The elderly man with the cane struggled to his feet. "In my day, we called men who picked on women cowards. I guess some things never change." Elena looked around the car, noting the shift in atmosphere. Where before there had been the familiar urban apathy and fear, now there was something else, a sense of community, of shared outrage at witnessing injustice. "The next stop is Union Station," she announced to the car at large. "I suggest these gentlemen use it to exit and reconsider their life choices." The leader's phone was still recording, but now it was capturing his humiliation rather than his anticipated triumph. His friends were already moving toward the door, clearly eager to escape before things got worse. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the words carried no conviction. He was a deflated bully, stripped of his perceived power and exposed as fundamentally weak. Elena met his eyes directly. Yes, it is. As the train pulled into Union Station, the four men slunk off like beaten dogs, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. The leader tried to maintain some dignity in his retreat, but his injured wrist and the video evidence of his defeat made any show of defiance ring hollow. The car erupted in spontaneous applause as the doors closed behind them. Elena found herself surrounded by grateful passengers, all talking at once. That was incredible. How did you learn to do that? Are you some kind of martial arts expert? Elena raised her hands for quiet, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding the need to address what had happened. I have some training, she said simply. But what's important is that we looked out for each other. That's what communities are supposed to do. The teenage girl who had been pressed against the window approached hesitantly. I was so scared, she admitted. I thought they were going to hurt you, and I didn't know what to do. Elena's expression softened completely. Being scared is natural. But you stayed alert, you were ready to help if needed, and you didn't let fear make you cruel. That takes its own kind of courage. The businessman who had recorded the incident stepped forward. I'm a lawyer, he said, offering Elena his card. If those men try to cause you any legal trouble, please call me. I'll represent you pro bono. What they did was completely unacceptable. Others chimed in with similar offers of support. Phone numbers were exchanged, social media contacts shared. A community had been forged in the crucible of shared experience. An older woman, elegantly dressed and carrying herself with quiet authority, studied Elena with knowing eyes. Military? She asked softly. Elena nodded, surprised by the recognition. A long time ago. My late husband was Army Special Forces. I know the look. The woman extended her hand. Thank you for your service. Both then and today. The gratitude in her voice was echoed throughout the car. Elena found herself shaking hands, accepting thanks, and trying to deflect praise she felt she didn't deserve. I'm a professor now, she explained to the growing circle of admirers. Medieval literature. Most of my battles these days are with comma splices and citation errors. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the kind that bonds strangers into friends. As the train continued its journey, Elena found herself in conversation with passengers who would normally never have spoken to each other. The mother with the young son was talking to the elderly man about neighborhood safety. The businessman was showing the teenage girl how to use her phone's emergency features. The elegant older woman was sharing stories of her husband's service with anyone who would listen. The incident had done more than neutralize four bullies. It had reminded everyone present that they were part of something larger than themselves, that they had both the right and the responsibility to stand up for what was decent. You know what bothers me most about guys like that, the businessman said, still energized by what he had witnessed. They count on everyone else being too scared or too apathetic to get involved. They depend on our silence. Elena nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly right. Bullies of all kinds rely on isolation, making their targets feel alone and helpless. The moment people realize they outnumber the aggressors, the whole dynamic changes. The teenage girl was looking at Elena with something approaching hero worship. I want to learn to do what you did. How do I start? Start with confidence in your own worth, Elena replied. Physical techniques are useful, but the most important skill is believing you deserve to be treated with respect. Everything else builds from there. She pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down several names. These are good self-defense programs in the city. But remember, the goal isn't to become a fighter. It's to become someone who won't be an easy target. The mother looked up from her conversation with the elderly man. I've been thinking about taking classes too. After what I saw today, I want my son to see that women can be strong. All of us can be strong, Elena corrected gently. Strength isn't about size or gender or how much you can bench press. It's about making the decision to stand up when it matters, even when you're scared. Her words carried the weight of experience, of someone who had faced real danger and emerged with wisdom rather than bitterness. Elena's stop approached, and she began gathering her belongings. The messenger bag that had seemed so academic an hour ago now felt different, not just a repository for student papers, but a symbol of the life she had built after leaving the military behind. The elegant, older woman walked with her toward the door. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but what you did today reminded me why I still have faith in people. We need more individuals willing to stand up for what's right." Elena smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "We don't need more people like me. We just need more people willing to be like themselves at their best moment." As she stepped onto the platform, Elena heard her name being called. The teenage girl was waving from the train window. "Thank you," she shouted over the rumble of the departing train. "Thank you for showing me what brave looks like." Elena waved back, then stood for a moment watching the red taillights disappear into the tunnel. Around her, the evening rush continued its relentless pace, but something felt different. The air seemed cleaner, the faces more open, the possibility of human decency more real. She thought about the papers in her bag, waiting to be graded. Tomorrow she would return to her quiet life of academic pursuits, to discussions of medieval romance and scholarly debates that would never make the evening news. But tonight, she had been reminded of something she had learned long ago in places far from Chicago, that heroism wasn't a job description or a military rank. It was a choice, available to anyone willing to make it when the moment demanded. The walk home took Elena through the university district, past coffee shops filled with her students and colleagues. None of them would have recognized the woman who had systematically dismantled 4 aggressive men on a subway train. To them, she was Dr. Vasquez, the soft-spoken professor who wore cardigans and spoke passionately about courtly love in Arthurian literature. But Elena had learned long ago that people contained multitudes, that the quiet librarian might have hidden depths, that the accountant might be a veteran, that the gentle teacher might once have been a warrior. Her phone buzzed with text messages. The businessman had already uploaded his video to social media, the elegant woman had sent a friend request, the teenage girl had posted a long Facebook update about the most inspiring thing I've ever witnessed. Elena smiled as she read the messages. In the age of viral videos and instant fame, she had no interest in becoming an internet sensation. Her satisfaction came from smaller victories, for bullies who would think twice before targeting their next victim, a car full of strangers who had rediscovered their shared humanity, a teenage girl who now knew that heroes came in all sizes. She climbed the steps to her apartment, a modest 2-bedroom filled with books and the accumulated treasures of a life devoted to learning. Her cat, Guinevere, greeted her with typical feline indifference, more interested in dinner than in tales of urban adventure. As Elena prepared her evening meal, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. Years ago, she had hung up her uniform believing that her days of making a difference through action were over. She had embraced the quiet life of academia, finding purpose in shaping young minds and preserving ancient wisdom. But today had reminded her that service took many forms, that the skills learned in one context could serve in another, that the decision to stand up for what was right was always relevant. Her phone rang, her sister calling for their weekly check-in. "How was your day?" Maria asked, the same question she posed every Tuesday evening. Elena looked at her reflection in the kitchen window, seeing both the professor and the soldier, the teacher and the protector. "Interesting," she said finally. "It was definitely interesting." By the next morning, the businessman's video had been shared thousands of times. The footage was clear, 4 men surrounding a small woman, her attempts at de-escalation, their escalating aggression, and then the swift, precise resolution that left the aggressors defeated and humiliated. The comments poured in from around the world. "This is what real strength looks like. Notice how she tried to avoid conflict until she had no choice. Those guys got exactly what they deserved. I want to learn to be that calm under pressure." Elena discovered the video's popularity when her students began arriving early to her morning lecture, their eyes bright with curiosity and admiration. Word had spread through the university's social networks with the speed of light. Professor Vasquez, one of her brightest students, approached after class. "Is it true? Are you really the woman from the subway video?" Elena set down her lecture notes and considered her response. She had spent years keeping her military background separate from her academic identity, but perhaps it was time to integrate those parts of herself. "I am," she said simply. "But I hope the lesson you take from it isn't about fighting. It's about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when, especially when, it's difficult." Her student nodded eagerly. That's exactly what people are saying online. That it wasn't about violence, it was about not letting bad people win through intimidation. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on her office door. Elena looked up to see a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed but with nervous energy. "Dr. Vasquez? I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News. I was wondering if you might be available for an interview about yesterday's incident." Elena considered the request carefully. Media attention was the last thing she wanted, but perhaps there was an opportunity to send a broader message. "5 minutes," she agreed. "But I choose the questions." The interview aired that evening, but it wasn't what viewers expected. Instead of focusing on the physical confrontation, Elena steered the conversation toward broader themes of community responsibility and mutual respect. "What I want people to understand," she said, looking directly into the camera, "is that what happened on that train wasn't about one person being a hero. It was about a community deciding to stand together against bullying behavior." The interviewer pressed for details about her military background, but Elena deflected skillfully. "My training helped, certainly. But you don't need to be a former soldier to stand up for what's right. You just need to believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." She spoke about the other passengers who had offered support, the businessman who provided legal assistance, the elderly man who had voiced his disapproval. Those people were heroes too. They chose involvement over indifference. The interview resonated far beyond Chicago. Within days, Elena was receiving emails from around the country. From teachers dealing with classroom bullies, from commuters who had witnessed harassment and done nothing, from young women asking for advice about self-defense. Each email received a personal response. Elena understood that she had been given a platform, and she intended to use it responsibly. One email particularly moved her. It came from the mother who had been on the train with her young son. "Dr. Vasquez, I wanted you to know that my son has been talking non-stop about the strong lady who helped everyone on the train. He's been practicing standing up straight and speaking clearly, like you did. You've shown him that real strength isn't about being the loudest or the meanest, it's about protecting others. Thank you for being the kind of person I want my child to become." 3 months later, Elena was preparing for her evening commute when she noticed a commotion on the platform. A group of teenagers was surrounding a young woman, their behavior eerily similar to what she had experienced that day on the train. But as Elena moved closer, ready to intervene, she witnessed something that filled her heart with pride. The businessman from her train stepped forward, his voice firm and confident. "That's enough," he said, positioning himself between the teenagers and their target. "Leave her alone." Behind him, other passengers were gathering, not running away or pretending not to see, but forming a protective circle around the frightened young woman. Elena recognized several faces from that day 3 months ago, but there were new ones too, people who had been inspired by the story, who had decided they wouldn't be bystanders anymore. The teenagers, faced with united opposition instead of isolated prey, backed down quickly. The young woman was surrounded by support, offered phone numbers and resources, reminded that she was not alone. Elena watched from a distance, tears pricking her eyes. This was what victory looked like. Not a single moment of conflict resolution, but a lasting change in how people chose to engage with the world around them. As she boarded her train, the businessman caught her eye and nodded. No words were necessary. They both understood that the real battle had been won not on that day 3 months ago, but in all the days since, when ordinary people had chosen to be extraordinary. A year later, Elena stood before a packed auditorium at the university, delivering a special lecture titled, "Heroes in Literature and Life." The audience included her students, colleagues, and dozens of community members who had been touched by her story. In medieval literature, she began, heroes were often defined by single acts of valor, slaying a dragon, rescuing a maiden, winning a great battle. But I've come to believe that real heroism is much more mundane and much more difficult. She clicked to her next slide, which showed not an image of knights in shining armor, but a photograph of ordinary people on a subway platform. Real heroism is the daily choice to treat others with dignity. It's the decision to speak up when someone is being mistreated. It's the commitment to be the person others can count on when times get tough. In the audience, she could see faces from that day on the train: the teenage girl, now a freshman at the university, the elegant older woman who had become a mentor and friend, the businessman who had started a foundation supporting victims of bullying. The story that brought us together didn't end when 4 men left a train car in defeat, Elena continued. It continued every time someone chose courage over comfort, every time someone extended help instead of turning away, every time someone decided they would not be a bystander to injustice. As the applause died down, a young man in the front row raised his hand. "Professor, what advice would you give to someone who wants to make a difference but doesn't know how to start?" Elena smiled, recognizing the question she had been asked dozens of times over the past year. Start where you are, with what you have. You don't need special training or extraordinary circumstances. You just need to decide that you matter, that others matter, and that what happens in your community is your responsibility too. She looked out over the audience, seeing faces filled with hope and determination. The world needs more heroes, she concluded. But it doesn't need more people like me. It needs more people willing to be the best version of themselves. And that opportunity is available to everyone, every single day. Real courage isn't found in movie theaters or between the pages of books. It lives in the hearts of ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when it matters most. Dr. Elena Vasquez's story reminds us that heroes walk among us every day. They're teachers and students, businesspeople and retirees, parents and teenagers. They're anyone willing to stand up and say, "Not on my watch," when they witness injustice. The most powerful weapon against bullying and intimidation isn't martial arts training or military experience. It's the simple recognition that we're all in this together, that what affects one of us affects all of us, and that silence in the face of wrong is complicity. If this story inspired you, don't just share it, live it. Be the person who steps forward instead of stepping away. Be the voice that speaks up instead of staying silent. Be the difference maker in someone else's story. Subscribe for more tales that celebrate the heroes among us and remind us that every single day offers us the chance to be the person the world needs us to be.